enough of the negativity. I had a couple of notes here. I was going to mention the fact that did anybody notice that there were 2 Fs in FIFA, same as in Fianna Fáil. Because what we saw last week, to me, was absolutely no surprise. How anybody can go up to somebody and say, yes, you have my vote, it's in the pocket. In fact, I first came across it in rugby, now that I think about it. I was dropped off the Irish team, and all 5 selectors, there were 5 selectors at the time, after the team was announced, every one of the 5 of them came to me and said, tough luck, Jim, but it wasn't me, I voted for you. I don't want to hog the proceedings, but a couple of things I would like to say. I presume a lot of you have read Theo Dorgan's piece today in the Irish Times. If you haven't, I would recommend it to you, because you have missed something very definite, very definitely, if you don't. Corruption isn't confined to politics, and again, we all know that, but I want to give you a story just by way of personal experience. My first job was in the bank. I got out of that too after 5 years. My first day in the bank, in the particular branch, it was a small branch, 1974, I was brought to the deposit desk. There were a staff of 9, and I was shown this massive ledger about this size, which opened out and doubled over. And it was an old-style handwritten ledger. This was pre-computerisation. And I was told that the best way to getting to know the clientele of the bank was to read through the deposit ledger and see how important. I'd see who they were, first of all, and then I'd see how important they were to the bank by dint of their balance. And we had total deposits in the branch at the time, I think, of about £80,000. I think it was even pre-punts. And there was one account which stood out a mile from all the others. This was in a relatively underprivileged part of the city, and there was one account that was had £8,000 in it. In other words, 10% of the total deposit base of the branch. And of course, you look to see who has £8,000, and the name was Michael Mouse. And there was an address which I remember to this day, and I went about my business over a period of getting to know the area and finding this address where the famous Michael Mouse lived. And I eventually found the address, and it was a street on which there were no houses whatever, totally and utterly derelict, and no sign of life for a long, long time, totally overgrown. So, of course, you say nothing, and you sit there and you watch and you wait, and eventually, about 4 months later, the bank manager took it upon himself to say hello to me again after 4 months. And he came down to the deposit desk with a little white chit in his hand, and he made an entry himself in the deposit ledger and left me with the chit so that I could balance my books at the end of the day. Of course, at this stage, the mind, even a 21-year-old mind, was working overtime, and I discovered it was the famed Michael Mouse. And I watched and sat and waited for the manager's door to open to see who Michael Mouse was, and Michael eventually emerged with a big bag of cash, and out he went. And it subsequently transpired I got to know the individual later in life, but I couldn't figure out how they were making the link and how they were getting through the audit procedures. And the situation was that you had a bank account in that amount. In those days, I would think they would have bought 2 semi-detached houses, certainly in Skerries, which nowadays would be worth about 400,000 each. That was the kind of money we were talking about. And this guy had, his name is Michael Mouse, had an address which wasn't a false address, but was a bogus address. And the only indication that it was him was if you turned the page of his ledger in very, very light pencil, in the top left-hand corner were his initials. Let's say JG or AB or JOT. Now, that was 1974. That particular branch of the bank was just after AIB had merged. AIB was formed by the merger of three banks, the Munster and Leinster, which were seen to be the wheelers and dealers of the south, the Provincial, which was seen to be the middle classes, the business classes of provincial Ireland, and the Royal Bank, which was seen to be the bank, not the Bank of Ireland, of the Protestant merchant classes. And they were seen to be as honest as the day was long. And this was in a Royal Bank branch. Now, that was corruption on a serious scale. That was 35 years ago, not today or yesterday, 35 years ago. That was condoned in bank systems at that time. And that gives me an indication of the depth of the corruption that there is. Now, I don't know whether the banks lied to Brian Cowan and Brian Lenihan on the famous night of the 29th of September 2008. But I think it is safe for anybody to assume that their returns to the central bank and to the financial regulator for a long period of time prior to that infamous night were economic with the truth, to put it mildly. And the laws of libel probably prevent me from going any further. My point, and I've laboured it somewhat and I apologise for that, corruption is at the core of Irish society because we have allowed it be at the core of Irish society. One of the horrible phrases I heard used on a regular basis in Leinster House, for example, in a couple of ways as a member of the Oireachtas, I went against the trend. I never sent out a Christmas card in my 7 years in Leinster House. I got my first this year, about a fortnight ago. I refused point blank to send them out, because to me there was a fundamental lack of respect. Thanks. The other point, I refused, where at all possible, to go to funerals. Although, as an indicator of the culture, I actually got invitations from people I didn't know to go to family funerals because they wanted a member of the Dáil there. But when I asked any of my colleagues who were complaining about the number of funerals that they had to go to, or the number of Christmas cards that they had to send out, or any of this parish pump stuff that they have to go on with to survive, the answer always was, if I don't do it, your man will, or your woman will. In other words, they'll get an edge on me within the constituency. And that to me is understandable in the circumstances, but the fact that it's understandable doesn't for a minute diminish the cowardice involved. And that is cowardice. And it's a lack of respect for oneself as a representative of the people. And it's something that goes to the heart of our system. I'm just finishing, Justine. I was in the Dáil chamber one day when Bertie Ahern said that the first duty, this is on the Dáil record, the first duty of every TD is to be re-elected. That to me is just fundamental debasement of our democratic system.